Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, February 20th, 2021, and around 3.5 years ago, I made an election prediction between Vice President Biden at the time and President Donald Trump in a 2020 presidential election scenario. This was prior to the 2017 governor elections, prior to the 2018 midterm elections, and we had no real indicator of who the front runner was going to be besides Joe Biden and besides Bernie Sanders for the 2020 Democratic primary. And looking back on it, and I'm sure you can tell from the title of this video, it was 92% accurate in terms of the overall outcome. It correctly predicted 47 out of the 51 states on this map. 51 states, when I say that, I mean the District of Columbia. So 50 states plus DC brings us to 51 in total. But it was accurate. 92% accurate at that 3.5 years out. And the reason why I think that this is really significant is because this was my first time ever making an election prediction between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Throughout the entirety of my channel, I'd made hundreds possibly of videos discussing the two candidates, at least now. Previously, before 2019, probably a handful, but this was the first one where I ever made a prediction. And this one was very dated. This one was posted on June 24th, 2017. For context, I was a freshman in high school, an incoming freshman at that. I was 14 years old making this election prediction. And I think this really goes to show that many of the trends that we knew would happen and did happen were very obvious from the beginning. And the reason why I stumbled across this is because I was going back to revisit this election prediction video that I made also in 2017, where I accurately predicted that Kamala Harris would be chosen as Joe Biden's vice president. This is the first video where I mentioned a potential VP candidate and VP contender for Joe Biden, and I chose Kamala Harris. Now, I chose her back then because I thought Donald Trump, Donald Trump wouldn't be someone that the Democratic Party could easily beat without using the appealing to minority voters differently. And I think that when Hillary Clinton chose an all-white ticket with Tim Kaine, I really do think that was something that didn't exactly inspire voters that were supposed to be solid for her because of Obama, because of the coalition that was built over 8 years. They weren't inspired to vote for someone who wouldn't really necessarily serve with them with a voice in the White House. And I think that Kamala Harris was the exact opposite of Joe Biden in the sense that she offered a younger point of view to the country. She offered a woman's point of view to the country. She also offered the fact that she was a woman of color. And, Joe Biden, someone who very much represents the status quo, especially within both political parties, almost always nominate white men to office. We've only had one president that wasn't white, and Joe Biden obviously isn't that president. But looking at what Kamala Harris served as, she was the breakaway from the traditional Democratic Party. And a lot of politics is optics, but I also think that she definitely served as someone who could provide a voice for disenfranchised communities in our country in the White House as vice president. So looking back on that, I wasn't reading too deep as I am right now into it, but I definitely thought if anyone, it would be Kamala Harris because she was a rising star. But looking at the prediction, the first prediction I made, looking at this map, it wasn't too far off. The only major states that were wrong, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. Coincidentally, this was almost exactly what my finalized map was, with the exception of Iowa, Ohio, and Maine's 2nd Congressional District voting a different way. But the point remains, the trends were very recognizable. And this is something that I also think needs to be pointed out because if my 14-year-old self could do this in my bedroom, figure this out initially, and the map was fairly accurate, well, why weren't Republican strategists noticing that Arizona and Georgia were absolutely in play? And, looking at this map, I honestly am very surprised that it was this accurate. Because looking at what happened in Iowa and Ohio, no one really could have predicted, I would say, that Donald Trump would have won these states by 8 points again in 2020. Nobody expected that. Not even right-leaning pollsters had put Donald Trump up 8 points. Some of them did back in 2016. Looking at the finalized results, the states didn't fundamentally shift at all. But looking at Arizona and Georgia, they certainly did. North Carolina got bluer, and I expected North Carolina and Florida to go blue in 2020. I had reservations about my Florida prediction on Election Day. I wanted to put it in the GOP column. I really wanted to, but I thought it would have been wrong. I thought that would have been wrong. My personal intuition was that, what I'm seeing break down in terms of the early vote isn't good for Democrats. It wasn't good for Democrats. I thought they could make up for it. Nothing was saying that they were going to make up for it, first of all, but I thought they were going to make up for it, and I was saying, this seems like it's going to be red, but it didn't end up, it didn't end up going to Joe Biden. So maybe I should have put it for Donald Trump in my prediction, but looking at the map that you're looking at, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida, Maine 2nd District, that's it. Overall, 92% accurate. And I think we can actually take a look at what happened in 2016 and what happened in 2020 and realize how someone of my age at the time was able to make a prediction that ended up being somewhat close to the electoral map. Because this was our 2020 electoral map. I got the Arizona flip right. I got the Wisconsin flip right. I got the Michigan flip right. The Pennsylvania flip. The Georgia flip. I was wrong in North Carolina, but keep in mind, Trump only won it by 1.3%. I was wrong in Florida. Trump won it by 3.3%. The only big misses were Iowa, Ohio, and Maine's 2nd Congressional District, which Donald Trump won with 52.5% of the vote. But looking at the electoral breakdown, it does seem very different because these states hold a lot of electoral votes. North Carolina with 15, Ohio with 18, Iowa with 6, and Florida with 29. I was going to miss the mark in terms of electoral vote count by a lot if I had these states in the Joe Biden column. But the main takeaway is the Rust Belt was the very easily recognizable part of the country that was going to go back to Joe Biden. Looking at the 2012 election victory for Barack Obama, I had no doubt in my mind at that time that Joe Biden was going to flip back the Rust Belt, especially with the history of the auto bailout. Maybe that's why Michigan went to Joe Biden by the largest margin out of all of the states. Who knows? But looking at the overall margins here for Obama, comparing them to Donald Trump and Donald Trump's unpopularity at the time, well, it made sense, to me at least back then, that Joe Biden was going to win those states. But looking at Ohio and looking at Iowa, states that were previously pretty strong, I would say, for Barack Obama, not as strong as they were for Trump by any means, but looking at the margin, well, I was saying, maybe Joe Biden could win them back. The last time he was on the ballot, the states had returned to the Democratic Party for the first time since George W. Bush. But looking at, not the first time, from George W. Bush in 2004. I don't mean to act as if it was a long period of time. But looking at Iowa and Ohio, well, they didn't end up flipping in 2020. But that's because the Republican support there seemed to be solidified over the next years. Iowa still didn't flip on the governor level. They had a few stellar House candidates, at least for the Democratic Party, but they always kick out their congressional representation. Almost always. We see a new set of congressmen every few election cycles in Iowa. But looking at the governorship, the Republicans still won it. Looking at the governorship in Ohio, the Republicans still won it. While Sherrod Brown won, he ran against a candidate who did not campaign nearly as well as Donald Trump, who came close to winning. So looking at those two states, if I had adjusted this after 2018, which is why you haven't seen me put Iowa and Ohio in the Joe Biden column in my final prediction, or really any major prediction leading up to the final few months of the election season. In fact, probably not at all in 2020. But looking at those two states, that was when I started to realize around 2019, 2020 that they would be out of reach for the Democratic Party. Competitive, but still out of reach. But North Carolina and Florida were always contentious because looking at Obama's margin of victory in Florida, he won. He didn't win by a lot, but he certainly did win. North Carolina was still somewhat close. In 2016, though Donald Trump flipped Florida, you have to realize that the races were still close. In fact, North Carolina and Florida flipped practically in terms of their margins. But the overall result was that Florida had flipped away from the last time that Joe Biden was on the ballot. And I did think that Joe Biden was going to be able to continue to hold Hillary Clinton's support, specifically amongst minority voters. If you take a look at this map, let's take a look at Miami-Dade County, for instance, a perfect example of a decrease in support that I didn't estimate 3.5 years ago, that people should have estimated, but I didn't even really leading up to Election Day. I knew that he had decreased support. I didn't think by this much, and you'll see exactly by how much. Because even though this year was 2020 was a record-breaking turnout year, the highest raw vote share for either political party in United States history, in terms of the overall amount of votes. Raw vote number, not raw vote share, raw vote total. 81 million votes for Biden, 74 million votes for Trump. But Miami-Dade County in Florida holds a lot of votes, 1 million votes cast in 2016. Hillary Clinton received, let me write this down actually, Hillary Clinton received 624,000 votes. Donald Trump received 334,000 actually. But let's take a look at 2020. The entire state shifted to the right for a reason. But Miami-Dade County was the largest shift in the entire state. Let's zoom in. Despite the year being record-breaking for both sides, Joe Biden actually received less votes than Hillary Clinton. Less votes than Hillary Clinton. And you might think maybe Donald Trump received less votes than he did in 2016. No. Donald Trump received 200,000 more votes than he received in 2016. 200,000 more. Joe Biden received, compared to Hillary Clinton, 7,000 less. 200K versus 7K when the year was record-breaking for both sides. One county, an indicator of the entire state. While Joe Biden did improve amongst white voters, these counties in the South really worked against him. Looking at the shift, Miami-Dade County, 22 points more Republican. Broward County, 5 points more Republican. Hendry County, 9 points more Republican. This is not what the Democratic Party wanted. This is not what they needed to win Florida. But it's what happened, which is why they didn't win. But if you take a look at the regions of the state with very solid conservative areas, Biden did better, but not enough to not even nearly enough to counteract the Hispanic counties, the majority minority counties, the counties with a very large minority population, almost all of them shifting to the right. And this wasn't an isolated event, but it wasn't enough to counteract the shift in the white vote in Arizona and Georgia. That was expected back in 2017. Why? Well, looking at the 2017 election results for Donald Trump, sure, he won Arizona by 3.5%. Sure, he won Georgia by 5.1%. But those were narrower than where they were back in 2012. In 2012, Romney won Georgia by 8 percentage points. In Arizona, Romney won it by 10.1 percentage points in Arizona. I mean, looking at the margin here, the states narrowed up significantly. They narrowed up by a lot. And I recognize that. We all recognize that, which is why I'm shocked that the GOP was surprised to see that Georgia moved away from them, or that Arizona moved away from them. Relative to 2012, Georgia shifted 3 points to Hillary Clinton despite the entire country shifting to the right. Arizona shifted to Hillary Clinton by 5.5%. Someone that the Republican Party, in hindsight, thought was a lackluster candidate. Someone the Democratic Party also thought was a lackluster candidate still shifted these two states. And it was obvious. I mean, honestly, looking at the map previously, outside of Iowa and Ohio, this was just the same map that I predicted. I ended up becoming 96% accurate by the time the finalized map was made, which is still, I would say, pretty strong. But 92%, 3.5 years out, looking at these major trends that were realized by a simple high schooler at that, I will say is something that is beyond me as to how the GOP didn't realize that as well. Because the Biden campaign certainly did. You see, Biden was criticized for not visiting states like Texas. He was criticized by many members of the left. I saw it personally, and I saw it on the news media. They were saying he's comfortable enough up in the Rust Belt. Why doesn't he branch out to other states? Well, Hillary Clinton decided to do that and lost. Joe Biden needed to solidify the Rust Belt, as we saw in the election results. And that's what happened. But Georgia and Arizona were two states that the Biden campaign knew they were going to do well in. Iowa and Ohio were complete missteps. That was just something that I thought would happen because I thought Biden would somehow return this region back into a Democratic stronghold. That didn't end up happening. But looking at North Carolina and Florida, honestly, looking back at my 2020 prediction, I expected them to be close. They were so close, but they just went in the opposite direction than I predicted them. But the fact remains is, these states, there were clear indicators, there were clear trends. The Rust Belt was going to be returned to. Georgia and Arizona were going to be states that could have gone to the Democratic Party. North Carolina and Florida were still competitive, and they were. They were all within single digits, less than 5% in both of them. North Carolina closer than Florida, surprisingly. But looking at the eventual results, honestly, besides, ignoring the electoral vote count, because these states are very populous, they are going to drive a lot of the support in favor of Joe Biden. But looking at the results, 375 obviously isn't comparable to 306, but it's the amount of states that matter. And, it was just 2 states off my final prediction and 4 states off the finalized election results. And I really think that it's just really interesting looking back on it, looking back on my own election prediction. This was partially just me being interested in how I previously predicted elections. And I never really actually analyzed my first ever prediction. I knew what I was doing then. I would say in terms of these states, I knew at least why. I wouldn't say I knew what I was doing. I would say I knew why I had these states blue and why I had some of these states red. But looking back on it, still a lot of the justifications were made. Arizona and Georgia, those are states that in 2012 you wouldn't have considered to be Obama lean states or Romney likely states at that. You would have said Romney has them solidified. They ended up being likely, but they were still solidified for the GOP, still solidified for John McCain, still solidified for George W. Bush, still solidified for previous Republicans. And looking at what we saw in 2020, even in 2017, not even a year after the 2016 election, was that these were very clear trends, and it was recognizable by almost everyone. And I think it's very surprising that Donald Trump and his campaign was so confident in winning there when they were regions of the country that were widely expected to be competitive, and they didn't really have that shocker moment until 2018 when the Democrats won a Senate race in Arizona and came close in the governorship in Georgia. That's when they realized these states might actually be competitive, but not even a year after, possibly a month after. You would have recognized that, hey, based off the trends we're seeing right now, Arizona and GOP could definitely be next on the hit list for the Democratic Party. Iowa and Ohio were miscalculations, but North Carolina and Florida, at the time, I would say, made sense to me, and also in my final prediction, also made sense, but, hindsight is 2020. No pun intended. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. I apologize for this video coming out really late. I wanted to stagger it because I released a video around 4 p.m. Eastern time, so I didn't want to release one just 2 hours later. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.